Welcome back to Book Break. This video is all about the best new historical fiction. So I think this time of year is just so perfect for historical fiction, and the world seems to agree. There's always so many great period dramas on TV, from A Christmas Carol to Call the Midwife. It just seems to be the best time of year to go back in time. So in this video, I'm going to tell you about the best new historical fiction novels of the year. So starting with the biggest historical fiction release of the year, Tombland by C.J. Sansom. So this is the 7th book in C.J. Sansom's Shard Lake series. This one is set in Norwich during Ket's Rebellion, and it's also a murder mystery. There is a reason why these books are so beloved. This is historical fiction at its absolute most lively and dramatic. Next up, I've got The Hiding Game by Naomi Wood. So this is an absolutely beautiful book, both in terms of that gorgeous cover and the book itself. This is basically The Secret History, but for art lovers rather than classics lovers. So it's about a group of students at the Bauhaus Art School in the 20s, and all of the love affairs and friendships and betrayals and tragedy that strikes during their time there. And then we also have this other timeline decades later where we check back in on how their time at the art school has affected them years later, and all of the secrets that are still bubbling under the surface. Now, The Winter Soldier by Daniel Mason. This is so beautifully written, but such a sad, harrowing book. So this is about a medical student named Lucius who enlists as a doctor during the First World War, and he's sent to this really remote field hospital where there's been a brutal outbreak of typhus, and it's just him and one other nurse who knows so much more about the actual practical side of medicine than he does, because he was only a few years into his studies and hadn't really dealt with any actual patients yet. So he basically has to learn from her as he goes along. And then one day, an unconscious soldier is brought in from the snow, so severely mentally scarred that he seems beyond repair. And the decisions that Lucius makes regarding this soldier will haunt him throughout the rest of the novel. Get the tissues to the ready, this one will break your heart. And now another World War I book, The Inheritance of Solomon Farthing by Mary Paulson-Ellis. So this is about an heir hunter named Solomon Farthing, who after an old soldier dies alone in a nursing home in present-day Edinburgh with no will but £50,000 sewn into the lining of his coat, it's Solomon Farthing's job to track down who should rightfully inherit this money. And delving into this mystery takes him all the way back to the story from 1918 with a group of 11 soldiers who were abandoned in a farmhouse billet. So in 1918, we see what happens in the weeks leading up to the armistice, and then present day we see how the effects of that time have just rippled through the generations, and all of the threads of the different timelines pull together so beautifully. Now, jumping forward a little bit to World War II, this is The Order of the Day by Eric Villard. So this is a very short, very gripping book about the pivotal meetings that took place between European superpowers in the build-up to the Second World War. So it's about this very real, very important period of history, but told as if it's historical fiction. And it's almost a black comedy, but telling this quite tragic story of how the actions of a few powerful men led the world to the brink of war. Now, The Glove Maker by Anne Weisgarber. I absolutely loved this book when I read it earlier this year. This is set in Utah in 1888 in a small Mormon community, this town with just 8 families. And our main character, Deborah, is anxiously waiting for her husband Samuel to return. He's been away travelling with work, and he was expected back weeks ago, and we're now entering this very harsh winter. And so the chances of his safe return home are looking slimmer and slimmer. So that's this constant, really sad backdrop as Deborah just waits and waits for news that Samuel is okay. But in the meantime, a stranger shows up one day and knocks on Deborah's door, asking for help hiding from the law. And that's when this tiny town starts to feel very claustrophobic, because how can Deborah hide her involvement in this crime when every footstep leading to and from her house can be seen in the snow? And then Blood and Sugar. This is Laura Shepherd Robinson's debut that came out earlier this year. It's set in 18th century Deptford during the time of the British slave trade, and it is a crime thriller following Captain Harry Corsham as he investigates a conspiracy that might just bring the British slave industry to its knees. And Laura Shepherd Robinson did a lot of research to this book, so there are horrors in here drawn straight from the real and terrible history of slavery. And this author is absolutely one to watch because her next book, Daughters of Night, is coming out next year. There are a few overlapping characters from the last book, but it will be a standalone with a whole new plot that this time puts women at the centre of the story. So with all of those, 2019 was such a great year for historical fiction, but it looks like 2020 might be even better, so I'm just going to mention a few more to get excited about for next year. So one that I have had the chance to read and absolutely loved is The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. So this is a Pride and Prejudice retelling, but all from the perspective of Mary Bennet. And all of your other favourite characters in Pride and Prejudice are back, but you're seeing them now in a whole new light. And poor Mary Bennet has always just been a bit of comic relief, but I promise by the end of this book you will adore her. And another fab one that I've already had the chance to read and love is The Animals at Lockwood Manor by Jane Healey. So this is set during World War II, when the mammal collection at the Natural History Museum has to be evacuated to keep it safe from the bombs being dropped on London. So we follow a young woman named Hetty who is put in charge of moving the collection and looking after the collection as it's housed at this mysterious manor house called Lockwood Manor, owned by the rather controlling and unpleasant Lord Lockwood and his beautiful but troubled daughter Lucy. So it's this rather gothic story as we explore what Lucy is so haunted by and whether there is any truth to the rumours of ghosts and curses that the locals talk about, and why the animals keep mysteriously moving in the night. But it's also a love story in a just brilliant setting. And then coming up later in the year will be The Sin Eater by Megan Campisi. So this is based on a real historical thing that I had never heard of before, which is sin eaters. So sin eaters were people who had been ostracized from society and now had to consume these ritual meals after somebody died to absorb the sins from that person. So the dead person could get into heaven, but the sin eater then had to carry those sins with them. And this book is about one sin eater named May, and it's this alternate history that's kind of dystopian, and it sounds really dark, and I'm so excited to read it. And finally, the big historical fiction release to look forward to next year, The Evening and the Morning by Ken Follett. So it's been 30 years since The Pillars of the Earth was released. It sold 27 million copies worldwide and started the Kingsbridge series, and now we're getting a prequel. So The Evening and the Morning is set at the end of the Dark Ages, and it's going to take us on this epic journey leading right up to where The Pillars of the Earth began. So which has been your favourite historical fiction novel of the year? Do leave me a comment below letting me know, and of course give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button below for new videos every week. Coming up next week we've got our Christmas gift guide, so get excited for that one. And of course in the meantime you can always follow us over on Instagram at BookBreakUK. See you next time!